She's co-signing what Alyssa Thomas did to Caitlin Clark. And these are the people in position in this league. Disgusting. Disgusting, man. Kristi Toliver, that's nasty of you.
Imagine watching Caitlin Clark scrambling for a loose ball, and in that split second, a fist drives straight into her throat while she's still fighting to get up off the floor. No whistle gets blown in the moment, and the play just continues like nothing happened. It isn't until hours later, when the league reviews the footage, that the WNBA upgrades the contact to a flagrant foul 2 and hands Alyssa Thomas a 1-game suspension for recklessly making contact with her fist to Clark's throat area. That part of the story already feels like enough drama for 1 week. But then Mercury associate head coach Kristi Toliver decided she wasn't finished, and she posted a photo of Thomas on Instagram with a Michelle Obama quote layered over it. The one about going high when others go low. A coach using a civil rights icon's words to defend a suspension for hitting Caitlin Clark in the throat. What happened to Toliver in the hours after that post went up is the part that's about to make a lot of people rethink everything they assumed about this situation. Right now, you're probably asking yourself how a coach in a professional league could possibly look at a fist to the throat and decide that was the moment to post something celebratory. You might be wondering whether Toliver even paused before hitting publish, or whether she had any idea how quickly that image would get screenshotted and spread across every corner of the internet. There's also the question that keeps nagging at people who've been following this Clark story for a while now, which is whether the reaction would look anything like this if the situation had been reversed and it was Clark's own coaching staff defending a hit on someone else. And underneath all of that sits the deeper question worth sitting with for a second, which is whether this Instagram post is really just about one bad caption, or whether it's actually revealing something about how parts of this league quietly feel about Caitlin Clark when the cameras aren't directly on them. By the time this video ends, you'll know precisely what Kristi Toliver posted, the exact wording she chose, and why borrowing that particular Michelle Obama quote for a basketball suspension turned into such a massive miscalculation. I'm going to walk you through the entire timeline in order, starting with the no call on the court itself, moving through the league's decision to upgrade the contract after the fact, and ending with how fast the backlash against Toliver built before she even had a chance to consider deleting anything. Along the way, you'll also hear exactly what Fever coach Stephanie White said about the officiating in this game, and why the word consistency keeps coming up every single time people in Indiana talk about how Clark gets treated on the floor. But before we get into all of that, do you think Kristi Toliver actually regrets posting that, or do you think she'd do it again without hesitation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
Go high, like, what are y'all doing, man? What are y'all doing, man? This league is a bunch of clowns. This league is a bunch of clowns, man. Is that Kristi Toliver? What a bunch of bozos, man. Hold on. Kristi Toliver. Is that? Wow. You got an assistant head coach for the Phoenix Mercury. Kristi Toliver co-signing.
What you just heard is a raw, unfiltered reaction, and it's the kind of reaction that tells you exactly how far this situation has traveled past basketball. The frustration in that voice isn't manufactured for a camera, and it isn't performative outrage either. It's the sound of someone watching a coach in a position of real authority publicly stand behind a play that put a fist into Caitlin Clark's throat during a live scramble for the ball. And here's where the stance needs to be drawn clearly, because there is no version of this where celebrating contact to someone's throat is defensible, regardless of who threw the punch or which team they play for. Choosing a Michelle Obama civil rights quote to frame a flagrant foul 2 as some kind of righteous, dignified stand isn't loyalty. It's a coach using her platform to minimize an act that the league itself reviewed and upgraded to a suspension. That distinction is exactly why the reaction you're hearing escalates the way it does, line after line. Because the deeper you sit with it, this was never really about defending a teammate. It was about dismissing what happened to Clark entirely. So now you're probably sitting there wondering how an associate head coach, someone with an actual title and actual influence inside that organization, someone whose job is partly about representing that franchise the right way, thought this was the right moment to post anything at all, let alone something framed as a moral victory over the player who got hurt. You might be asking yourself, why nobody around Toliver? Not a teammate, not a front office staffer, not a single person in that building who presumably saw this before the rest of the world did, stepped in and stopped that post before it ever went live. There's also the harder question sitting just underneath that one, which is whether Toliver genuinely believes Clark somehow provoked that contact in the middle of a routine scramble for a loose ball, or whether this was always just about shielding her own player, no matter what the footage clearly showed every single person who watched that game. And beneath all of it sits the question that turns one bad Instagram post into something much bigger and harder to shake off, which is whether this is actually a glimpse into how certain coaches and players around this league have quietly been treating Caitlin Clark all season long, away from the cameras, regardless of what the rulebook technically says about what crosses the line and what doesn't.
Coach of the Phoenix Mercury, associate head coach, and she's co-signing the assault on Caitlin Clark. When they go low, we go high. Michelle Obama. That was a quote. She's co-signing what Alyssa Thomas did to Caitlin Clark. And these are the people in position in this league. Disgusting. Disgusting, man. Kristi Toliver, that's nasty of you.
The most honest answer is that Toliver had every opportunity to support her player without trivializing what happened to Clark, and for whatever reason, she chose not to take it. That choice matters because a one-game suspension for a fist-making contact with someone's throat isn't a minor or borderline call that could go either way on appeal. It's the league reviewing the footage after the fact and confirming in writing that this crossed a line serious enough to warrant discipline. A coach publicly celebrating that crossing, especially one in a position like associate head coach, sends a message about how seriously player safety is actually being taken whenever Clark happens to be the one on the receiving end of the contact. This pattern isn't new either, and it isn't isolated to this one moment. Physical play against Clark has repeatedly been excused, downplayed, or outright defended by people who absolutely should know better given their positions inside this league, and that exact pattern, repeated often enough, is what's fueling the anger you just heard pour out in real time from someone who's clearly watched this happen one too many times. Toliver's silence in the hours that followed, no clarification, no walking it back, no acknowledgement that the timing or the framing was a problem, only adds another layer to what's coming next.
Just know who couldn't stay out of it. You know who couldn't mind their damn business. Dejanay Carrington. Dejanay Carrington, pardon me. Dejanay Carrington has to insert herself into everything Caitlin Clark as often as possible because without Caitlin Clark, Dejanay Carrington is irrelevant. Nobody's checking for Dejanay Carrington. I don't even think she's playing this year. If she was playing, the Chicago Sky stink. Nobody cares about Dejanay.
What you're watching here is a different kind of reaction, one that shifts the target away from a coach and toward a player getting dragged into this for resurfacing an old grievance at exactly the wrong moment. The reaction calls out Dejanay Carrington for bringing up the Sophie Cunningham suspension and questioning why that situation didn't get the same punishment as the Alyssa Thomas hit on Clark, and on the surface, that's a fair comparison to make. Where this gets messier is the leap from questioning consistency in officiating to standing behind an assault, because those are two completely different conversations getting flattened into one. Raising a point about inconsistent discipline across similar incidents is normal in sports. Every league deals with that kind of scrutiny. But once it gets framed as picking a side on whether Clark deserved to get hit, the conversation stops being about fairness and starts being about loyalty lines. And that shift is exactly what sets up the next wave of questions. So you're probably asking yourself whether comparing the Cunningham situation to the Thomas suspension is actually a fair point or just convenient deflection dressed up as accountability. You might be wondering why this specific comparison keeps getting dragged back into every Clark-related controversy instead of being addressed once and put to rest. There's also the question of whether bringing up inconsistent suspensions actually means someone is excusing what happened to Clark, or whether that's reading intent into a comment that was never really about her in the first place. And the bigger one underneath all of it is this entire pattern less about any single player's opinion and more about how every reaction near Clark gets filtered through a side-picking lens before anyone even finishes hearing the point.
Look at this. Dejanay getting involved in anti-Caitlin narratives again by reposting the below tweets. Okay. And this was, it says, why wasn't this also a suspension in reference to the Sophie Cunningham situation with the Connecticut Sun last year? We all know how that debacle played out. Okay, and that was in response to this, where it says Alyssa Thomas suspended one game for recklessly making contact with her fist to throat of Caitlin Clark. And then she also reposted this. Let's show Alyssa Thomas clip in real time. So Dejanay Carrington is basically standing with Alyssa Thomas. She's standing with Caitlin Clark being assaulted. That's clearly what this is. She doesn't care. You know, Dejanay Carrington does not care if Caitlin Clark is assaulted or not. She wants it. She probably.
The honest answer is that the Cunningham comparison holds some weight. The WNBA has been inconsistent in how it reviews and reclassifies fouls across similar incidents, and that's a real documented pattern worth criticizing on its own terms, regardless of who brings it up or when. Officiating consistency is a legitimate complaint in this league, and pretending otherwise just to protect a narrative doesn't serve anyone either. But conflating a fair point about that inconsistency with celebrating a throat shot is a stretch that doesn't help anyone, including the person making the comparison, because it muddies a legitimate argument with an implication that was probably never intended. What's actually happening is a league-wide habit of treating every Clark-adjacent comment as a referendum on whether you're for her or against her, instead of letting people raise specific narrow points without it being read as a verdict on her safety or her treatment as a whole. That habit is exactly why these moments keep snowballing instead of getting resolved, because nuance gets erased the second a comment touches Clark's name, and everyone involved ends up further apart than when the conversation started. That exact dynamic is about to show up again, and this time it comes straight from inside the Mercury locker room itself, where the stakes get even harder to ignore. So when you put the whole timeline together, a no call in real time, a league review that upgraded it to a suspension, and then a coach choosing to frame that suspension as a moral victory, you start to see why this stuck around longer than a typical foul controversy. This was never just about one Instagram post or one quote choice. It's about whether the people inside this league actually treat contact to Clark's safety with the seriousness they'd demand for anyone else. And that's the uncomfortable part nobody wants to say out loud. The rule book only matters as much as the people enforcing and surrounding it are willing to respect it. If you want the full picture every time one of these Clark moments turns into a league-wide reckoning, subscribe now, because this conversation about consistency, accountability, and respect on the floor is far from finished.